The Spin-off Podcast Network.
This is Kiwi is back for a brand new season with more inspiring kōrero from special guests, including lead actor of global Netflix series Three Body Problem, Jess Hong.
I've got into places where I never even imagined.
And full-time Kiwi travellers and digital nomads, Dane and Stacey. What's a common misconception that people have about you and what you do?
That content creation isn't a job.
Listen to the new season of This is Kiwi, brought to you by the Spin-off Podcast Network in collaboration with KiwiBank. Available now wherever you get your podcasts.
There are many reasons why you might invest in a Fisher Funds managed fund, whether it's for the grandkids, your retirement, or that investment property. Whatever your reason, a managed fund is a smart and flexible way to help you achieve your ambitions. Take the first step. Visit our website or call us to speak with an expert advisor today. Fisher Funds Management Limited is the issuer of Fisher Funds Managed Funds. A product disclosure statement for the scheme can be found at fisherfunds.co.nz.
Before we get started, Ben, I'm just getting a little bit of your beard in your microphone.
No, sorry.
So, yeah, that'd be...
It's quite a lush beard at the moment,
It's
isn't
beautiful,
it?
yeah. It reminds me of Eugene Bingham's beard, which is also lush
Oh,
and
it is
amazing.
lovely lush beard,
He's got
Eugene
an
Bingham's beard.
incredible
Do you
beard.
condition the beard?
I don't condition the beard. What are you talking about?
No, just like...
It will be quite
it looks
snuggly
groomed.
if
It looks
you did.
groomed.
This is not the result of going to some fucking barber who puts sandalwood wax in it and serves you a craft beer while you fucking wait. Like,
The evidence suggests otherwise. Tēnā koutou katoa, I'm Toby Manhire. This has gone by lunchtime. Welcome, everyone, on this day, the 4th of September. It's about 9:45 in the morning. With me, Annabelle Lee-Mather. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
In Wellington, Ben Thomas.
morena.
And holding the whole thing together, as always, Te Ahi Butler.
Kia ora.
Now, the main subject of discussion really is what's been going on in Ngāruawāhia. Annabelle, where you've returned from recently, you've been down there. Massive crowds at the Tūrangawaewae Marae for the third time this year. Big crowds. Most recently, I think it was just over a fortnight ago, we had the Kīngitanga, which was marking 18 years on the Kīngitanga throne for Kīngi Tuheitia. A sadder occasion in recent days after Tuheitia died at the end of last week after, I think, complications following heart surgery. And we're on day 4 of the tangi now, or something, maybe 5 even, and just huge crowds down there. Tell us what you saw. Tell us what the mood is at Ngāruawāhia.
Unfortunately, I didn't actually get to see very much. Like, I didn't get over onto the marae itself. I was in the media centre, but tens of thousands of people. By the end of the tangi, there would have been, hundreds of thousands of people who have passed through Ngāruawāhia. I was walking over the bridge back to my car and walked past the aropu of Sikh men who were on their way, and then later I saw them pop up on a social media clip from the posted by the Kīngitanga, where they talked about how they had just translated all of their scriptures into te reo Māori. So literally every type of person, every type of New Zealander you can imagine, from Te Ao Māori across Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, hundreds of thousands turning up to pay their respects. And it made me think, is there any other New Zealander that could draw a crowd like that? I can't really think if there's any other person alive here in Aotearoa where so many would feel compelled to drive across the motu to come and pay their respects to them.
Yeah, it is interesting. And, it's, you don't really want to sort of look at these things necessarily in political terms, but of course, the king is was a political figure. It's a political office. And sort of thinking back to his mother's tangi back sort of, 18, 19 years ago in 2006. And that came at a time when we had sort of had the sort of poisonous Don Brash iwi Kiwi election. It was sort of a couple of years after the Orewa speech, when I think, division and rancor around sort of race issues and Māori issues and treaty issues was, basically the worst I can remember. And probably the only time worse than I can think of than the current moment, sort of the last 2 decades. And it really was interesting. Even Chris Trotter, who's always jonesing for a race war, wrote about the tangi and sort of talked about it as, this kind of glimpse into a different world that a lot of, Pākehā or European New Zealanders had never seen before. And it really did have this kind of unifying effect. And I still think about some of the imagery of, sort of, I think it was the waka floating down the stream, sort of shrouded by mist. And it is, it's the timing, I think Tuheitia had sort of, he had really kind of assumed that sort of mantle in a way that perhaps he hadn't before, sort of recently, in terms of, unifying and rallying sort of Māoridom as a whole, and providing a real sort of focus point, with those hui at the end of last year, at the beginning of this year. And it will be interesting to see what impact, his tangi has, on the sort of national mood, the temperature of things.
And it's impossible to escape the political context. Today, Wednesday, the politicians will be attending to pay their respects. I don't think it will turn into, it's unlikely, I don't think anyone is particularly hungry for a political debate on the pai. I don't know. Christopher Luxon went earlier in the week because he's currently abroad in Malaysia and then South Korea. But in terms of the politics of the Kīngitanga, Annabelle, it's a political organisation in part from its very foundation, right? And that when it was formed in the 1850s, it was in response to some illegal land sales and an attempt to try and bring together Te Iwi Māori in some form in a kind of analogue or a reflection of what was seen in the way the Crown was represented from afar, and to try and so that foundation that was forged in the fire of a political imperative.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I think that when things are tough in New Zealand, when we're experiencing, difficult periods in our race relations, so many of us turn to the Kīngitanga for that sense of unity and connection, and to draw strength from one another. And I think that has really distinguished Tuheitia's reign. And so,
across the course of it, or more recently?
No, I think it's been fascinating to watch how his approach to leadership has changed over the course of his reign. I think in the earlier days, unlike his mother, who kind of steered away from politics as much as possible, kind of rose above the phrase of the day, he was more prepared to get in there and voice his opinions very much on a party political level, which is what we saw, happen in terms of his support of the Te Pāti Māori, calling on the people of Hauraki Waikato not to support his whanaunga Nanaia, but to support the Māori Party candidate, those sorts of things. But, there's been changes in his office over that period as well, and I feel like for want of a better word, the administration that is there now supported him to, I guess, better articulate his vision for Aotearoa and for Te Ao Māori. So I think we've seen a shift where he became less party political in his approach and more focused on the message of unity and all of those things. And we were speaking to Jason ake yesterday on Mata, Jason, who is, well-known Māori political commentator and the head of communications for Waikato Tainui, and he reminded us about the incredible position that the leadership position Tuheitia, Kīngi Tuheitia took during COVID, being one of the first people to make the call to close down the marae of Waikato, holding his koro neihana online instead, an incredible, bold decision at the time, writing a whole lot of the ture o tikanga we should practice during COVID to keep each other safe. So a remarkable reign that just got stronger and stronger and stronger, in my view.
And how much, you mentioned Waikato Tainui, which is where the Kīngitanga sits, how much of the Kīngitanga movement now is Waikato Tainui and how much it is it iwi Māori more broadly?
Just to clarify, Waikato Tainui is actually the settlement body of the iwi. The iwi is Waikato and Tainui is the waka that a whole lot of other iwi come from as well, like Manhire and those guys. What I think, as a result of the incredible leadership he's demonstrated, what I see more and more is more of our rangatahi across te ao Māori who he's captured the hearts and minds. And so I've seen this mass renewed commitment and belief in the power of the Kīngitanga. It used to be something that more our kaumātua, were very committed to, but the way our rangatahi have taken up the messages and the challenges that he's laid down to us is really quite remarkable.
It is interesting that talk about a generational change within te ao Māori, that it's sort of managed to channel some of that. And Ben, I think it's hard to understate that the Te Hui a Motu, which was held at the start of the year in January, wasn't it, as a rallying point for a range of different Māori voices to respond to, as you touched on, a series of policies that are seen as taken together an attack on te ao Māori.
Yeah, that's right. And, while certainly not every iwi or members of not every iwi would sort of consider themselves, part of the Kīngitanga movement, it still serves this kind of, this function as a kind of rallying point, as a sort of, central place for people to gather. And, you see that, with the tangi this week, groups that, really aren't sort of, weren't politically kind of, involved in the Kīngitanga, certainly going to pay their respects in pretty large numbers.
And about what happens next? I mean, right now there are discussions taking place about the succession, and it's not as simple. It's not primogeniture. It's a complex. There are discussions about. It's not necessarily the eldest, and in fact, the eldest. There have been all sorts of dramas, and the prediction is that it's most likely to be his daughter that succeeds. There's a very good piece by Liam Ratana on the Spin-Off at the moment, explaining the process by which this happens, including a group, the 12 Te Kaumārua, who gather together, which includes I think Penny Henry and Hone Haruera, among others.
I think Penny used to be on Te Kaumārua.
Okay.
I'm not sure if he's still on Te Kaumārua, but he's certainly an influential.
There's definitely a prestige drama series to be made about this process, a scripted one, which you need to crack on with, I think. But that it's not quite the papal white and black smoke coming out of, but there's going to be a huge crowd there probably in this moment when the successor to Tuheitia emerges. How important is that? Is that in terms of continuing that energy that is built out in the last year, especially in the Kīngitanga, in terms of what comes next and in the cultural, political world?
Yeah, it's an elective process. So, it's the Te Kaumārua, for want of a word, the Privy Council, a set of advisors to the monarch. But those guys also, they also reach out to all of the other hapu and iwi that they affiliate to, and they have discussions with those guys, and all of those messages are then filtered down, and at the end of it, you get a monarch. The 3 children of Kīngi Tuheitia were teenagers. I think the youngest was like 11 when he acceded to the throne. So a lot of difficult way to spend your teenage years with so much attention and expectation on you. 3 people with 3 very different sets of skills and qualities, I think comes at a really critical time for all of Te Ao Māori in the face of, these regressive political policies that we're seeing enacted. So, ka aroha hoki ki tērā tangata. It's a challenging role that they're going to be taking on, but also the institution of the Kīngitanga is just truly remarkable. And when you're at Tūrangawaewae, I know I've spoken about this before on the pod when I went to Huiamotu, but when you see the thousands of people who make that marae work, who hold that institution together, the ruru crew that come in at night and sweep all of the marae, the K-pop gang that goes in and changes all of the, the bedding and all of that stuff, the ringawera, the people in the kitchen, the ones out killing the beasts, all of that. It's just so remarkable to bear witness to. And you can have post-settlement iwi, you can have billions of dollars, but what they have, that commitment. And the thing to remember during this tangi too is they've just done a week of koro neihana.
Oh, barely finished. They've barely got the tents down, I imagine.
So you've got thousands. This is a volunteer army we're talking about. These are people who do it for love.
Tūrangawaewae should be running Auckland Transport.
Tūrangawaewae should be running New Zealand.
Yeah.
Literally, like actuals. It's just an incredible institution, something all New Zealanders should be in awe of and feel proud of.
Yeah, and just going back, I think that's, it is really great that, for instance, TV1, I think have done a lot of coverage of this. RNZ obviously have provided a lot of coverage, and I just think it's really good to be able to sort of expose, that kind of dedication, that kind of culture, and to a wider audience. And I think the events like this can, obviously it's a sad occasion, but they can really sort of help just kind of subtly shift how people are looking at things in New Zealand, which I think we're probably a little bit overdue for, Hope.
So true. And, you don't have to see things wrapped up in big essay form. You just tune into the live stream and you check it out or watch a bit of the coverage that that Annabelle and Mihi have produced for Mata on RNZ. Some of that, it's just sort of, you can tune in for a bit and tune out and get a taste of it. It's so it's worth doing. Also,
wonderful coverage that you can watch. The Kīngitanga has its own live stream, which is everything that's happening on the pai. So you get to see all of the amazing, orators. It's like, the Olympics of Toastmasters, but a million times better. But also Te Ao Māori, iwi radio, a lot, even on the Mata page, there's a live stream which is being produced by a collaboration between iwi radio, Whakaata Māori, and that's interviews with all of the people going on to the marae, so you get to listen to, everyone's stories about why they're there and all of that sort of stuff. So if you're keen to tune in, there's some amazing coverage. And respect to our reporters and our crews that are doing that mahi, because they've been on it, waking up at like 5 o'clock every morning and going all day into the night. So just an incredible, turnout. And again, the message of kotahitanga has resonated with the Māori media as well. Everyone's, working together to produce the best coverage possible.
Speaking of, two of the spin-off's hotshot reporters, Liam Ratana and Lyric Waiwari-Smith, are there now as we speak and will be reporting for spinoff.co.nz. Keep an eye on that. I think they got up at 4:30 this morning or something. And I've seen some photographs and they look really fly, so that's important too.
We started doing a pepeha.
I don't know where I'm from.
Yeah, I'm gonna go check with the chef.
Takeout Kids, a coming-of-age documentary series, returns for Season 2. From a Thai restaurant to a dairy to a nail salon, 5 young people balance school and relationships while growing up in their families' shops.
Are you working tomorrow?
Oh, school.
Watch Takeout Kids on the spin-off today, made with the support of New Zealand On Air.
Let's move on to that other, having discussed the infrastructure at Ngāruawāhia, let's talk about the infrastructure in Aotearoa more broadly. I can see your eyes light up at that thought there, Annabelle Lee-Mather. There's been a lot of infrastructure chat in the last fortnight. There was a lot of it around the conference, Infrastructure New Zealand conference, held in Auckland, where the special guest was Francis Fukuyama, which was quite something.
Wait, was it?
Yeah.
I missed it
Francis
totally.
The end of history and the last road cone was his address, I think. But he's now a sort of expert in vetocracy and bureaucracies and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's what he was speaking to.
He was like, the ideological challenge is over. We have now agreed on a consensus for a non-partisan infrastructure pipeline.
Well, that's the kind of if he could crack that would be the equivalent of Western liberal society, which was the earlier one, which he slightly missed the mark on. We've got what do we got? 30-year national infrastructure plan declared, a beefed up infrastructure pipeline. Love a pipeline. The infrastructure priorities program. Be more public-private partnerships and value capture to fund of the infrastructure. A new infrastructure agency, good, which is built out of Crown Infrastructure Partners. The Infrastructure Commission remains. Ben, we're not very good at infrastructure, but we're very good at meta-infrastructure, aren't we?
Can I say this again is a job for Waikato?
Yeah.
You would eight lane highway around Hamilton. 12 lanes going to the shopping centre.
140k speed limit.
Yeah. Look, this is certainly something that everyone's been talking. People have been talking about the pipeline. Much longer than, while everyone's been talking about the pipeline, all the actual pipes have burst and put shit on the streets. Chris Bishop seems to have a more certain kind of idea of where he is going than previous infrastructure ministers, going back to probably, Bill English, the first infrastructure minister. Where I think there's a lot of time spent around sort of noodling and doing stock takes and sort of how many schools have we got, how many hospitals, how many roads will we need in the future, but not a lot of sort of action. I think the expansion of Crown Infrastructure Partners into the National Infrastructure Agency, it's really just more sort of, scaling it up in terms of, I guess what they're talking about sort of Kiwi build. It's, there to be a disruptor. It's there to, start connecting finance, helping oversee projects, just taking on sort of a more of a kind of guiding role for these projects because, in the financing and the contracting for these projects, that's where we end up getting, these massive delays, massive overruns. In terms of, the dream of the bipartisan pipeline, again, I think, National and Labour both agree that there should be a bipartisan agreement on, future infrastructure spending. But of course, I think I've said this before, North and South Korea both agree that there should be one Korea with a single capital. It's the details where you really kind of get
both main parties agree that there should be a consensus and a bipartisan approach based around what they want to do.
Yeah, that's right. And Bishop has sort of, put out the olive branch and said, I want to have cross-party talks.
Like a 6-month heads up or something.
Yeah. Well, no, more if there's sort of, if there's something that's really crucial to Labor and the Greens for the future, let's chuck that on the pipeline, give them a bit of a, let's have some give and take so that we can sort of all agree on the broad shape of how projects are going to roll out. Can that kind of strategy be enduring? There are many reasons to doubt it. And one reason is that despite the big plans, there are going to have to be decisions made about prioritization on cost. The Transport General Policy Statement, which was released this week, shows that there's not enough money in the Land Transport Fund to fund, probably about, I think it's about half of the government's top priorities, which is, of course, where the sort of public-private partnerships, user pays comes in. But even then, there is a big gap between, what you want to build and how much money there is in a middle-income country to build it. And you could imagine a world where the opposition's sort of traded off kind of priorities kind of are the ones that slip off the bottom in those cases.
Yeah.
It's a high trust exercise.
There's a very good column by Claire Trevett in the Herald this week on the sort of attempt to find a bipartisan consensus on infrastructure. And she sort of talks about the appeals from Bishop as infrastructure minister for, how we need to have continuity. But at the same time, National came in and killed Auckland Light Rail, Let's Get Wellington Movement, Three Waters, and the Housing Accord. And Bishop's response to that was, yeah, but those are all dumb projects, which is, probably the problem with is that they weren't started projects from terms of what Labor did or didn't do.
It seems unfair to say that Bishop killed light rail. Like that's one weird piece of
right. It's like, they're getting into
light rail.
I think he switched off the. He pulled out
there
the
wasn't
plot.
even a thesis.
Something that isn't breathing. That has yet to draw its first breath.
That's true. Another Bishop line, Annabelle, that I read via Claire Trevett, was that he says, I find it frustrating that particular modes of transport have become politicised. National likes roads, the Greens like cycleways, Labor likes light rail, and so it goes. It's frankly pretty trite and unsophisticated. Great point. Pretty much in the next breath, Simeon Brown comes out and with barely contained relish says, if you want cycleways, you're going to have to pay for them your fucking self.
I agree. Like, cycling is really unsophisticated.
Separately, the fast track, which is another plank of the infrastructure challenge, that's been at Select Committee, the Environment Committee, 27,000 submissions, and Chris Bishop had intimated that there would be some.
27,001. There's been a submission from Cabinet.
Is there?
Yeah, well, Cabinet came up with some ideas on how they thought that the bill should be amended by the Select Committee. Obviously, they'll have to wait and see how the committee receives their submission, considers it alongside the other 27,000, because of course parliamentary privilege requires that, ministers don't have any input on bills while they're in Select Committee consideration. So they're just sort of thinking out loud, writing a letter, just as anyone can.
Maybe Cabinet just filled out one of those auto response forms, That's kind of the big difference is that political triumvirate of Chris Bishop, Simeon Brown and Shane Jones were going to go on a roadie, a boys' trip, and make the final decisions on all these fast track projects. Now it's going to be Chris Bishop who ushers them makes the decision stands at the door and decides whether they go to the panel, and the expert panel will be the ones who make the final call. And in many ways, that's a kind of analog of what happened in the Labor government and the post-COVID infrastructure fast track stuff. 384 projects. Are you reassured, Annabelle, that this is now a more sensible and necessary approach?
I think, most critics of the bill would think that not having three ministers have the final say is a good thing, but that probably those changes don't go far enough. One of the concerns I've seen talked about is that projects that have already been, lost in court, basically, rejected by the courts, can get back in there and be completely relitigated over again.
Although now they will have to produce the court judgment now. In the past, they could just sort of turn up with sort of a fake moustache and be like, I'm here to have a new project consented.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny that we're talking about this stuff like a week after that river turned bright orange.
Oh, wow. Like full Powerade.
Yeah. And Mihi and I recently published a story about the Tasman Pulp and Paper Mill, which was set up under its own special fast-track legislation, and about the unforeseen consequences of fast-tracking projects like that.
Is that the one with the perfidious Finns who have pulled out of the country and
yes,
sort of
Norska Skog.
Yeah, that's the lake that was filled in.
That's right.
I've been down there. Terrible situation.
It's a terrible, terrible situation. And it's not just the lake. It's that, they turned the Tarawera River black because they were able to dump everything into the Tarawera River. The workers were poisoned. For me, one of the takeaways about that story in terms of the fast-track legislation and how we talk about it being great for the economy and all of those things is that, a lot of these kaupapa are really, sort of one big project in a town. And I think from what we've learnt from the kawerau experience is that when you have one big show in town that is kind of the single point of economic dependency for an entire community, when the lifespan of that project is over, in the case of the pulp and paper mills, people didn't need pulp and paper anymore because everything was on the internet. It actually causes a catastrophic financial collapse in those communities, that is followed by bad health, suicide, crime, all of those things. So, if you've got time to watch it, people go and have a look because it's kind of a parable, I guess, of what happens when you fast track things without thinking about what happens, 50 years down the road.
Yeah, and obviously, now the interesting story on Newsroom, Fox Maya had a bit of a scoop that the fast track legislation was sort of drafted by New Zealand First prior and sort of introduced during the coalition negotiations. But the original
Casey
version,
Costello can't work out where she found the note paper.
I don't know.
Sorry, continue.
I think they just find that Winston just says, go to the back of my car. There's just, there's just these boxes,
the sixth
unlabeled,
briefcase
unnamed.
down.
Yeah, that's right. It's like Pulp Fiction, you just open it, there's this glowing light, and then policy documents come out. Yeah. And but that original draft, probably because they hadn't sort of firmed up their strong negotiating position, actually did have the expert panel as the chief decision maker or the final decision maker, and it became a ministerial decision as it was developed by them and National in government. Which I thought was interesting. If you were sort of a paranoid 4D chess kind of person online, you might say that they introduced a more extreme version so that they could scale it back. Although looking at sort of Shane Jones's dejected figure when they announced the changes, I don't think that's right. I think he got quite attached to it. But the composition of the expert panel is very important. One of the other changes which hasn't gotten a lot of attention. The original composition of the expert panels, when they were merely sort of recommendatory, had to have a representative nominated by the relevant iwi authorities in the area, and that's no longer the case. That only has to be they only have to have that representative they say if required by those settlements. And I think that's to do with sort of resource management arrangements for, that are put out in settlements, because obviously no settlements contemplated this legislation.
There is a requirement that panel members have expertise in Māori development and te ao Māori, although
which is a change
nebulous.
From Mātauranga Māori, which I think that's probably a good change. I don't think that the two things are necessarily... although Māori development, you can see where they're sort of angling, right? Yeah. Putting in the words development. And there's also now a requirement that somebody on the panel have environmental expertise. So that's probably good. That's probably useful.
That'd be nice. Yeah, lovely. Yeah, and there's still plenty. We don't know what the makeup of that panel is crucial. We also don't know yet what the projects are. So there's 384 projects, and they've given us a breakdown of how 5% of mining, 5% quarrying, 8% primary industry, 18% renewable energy, so many more renewable energy than old school mining, 24% for what are called infrastructure projects. So there'll be more to come when we start learning about the contents of those. Speaking of Shane Jones and his sort of happy birthday, Matua, 65.
Chris Bishop's birthday as well.
Is it?
I saw that on Facebook.
25. How old is he?
Well, yeah.
That's good. A lot of happy birthday to you too, if you had one in the last 12 months. Shane Jones has had a little rap on the knuckles, Annabelle, from Judith Collins, the Attorney General, over remarks he's made about judges, which is a bit of a Shane Jones jazz standard. He most recently described High Court Justice Cheryl Gwynne as a communist, which outraged the Labour Party, who can't abide by such slurs.
And then the funniest thing that Christopher Luxon's officers ever said, which was it's a matter of public record that the judge was a member of the Young Socialist League in the 1970s and 80s.
It's also funny how boomers think that calling people communists is a major insult, but young people think it's like a badge of honour.
Well, yeah. And then he went on, when asked to describe, as you point out, Ben, Shane said, "Well, just a description. It's not an insult. It's a description." And then Christopher Luxon said, "Yeah, great line. I'll repeat that in Parliament." Shane Jones then challenged on it, went up and said that there'd been elements of totalitarianism in the judiciary. And you're sighing, Ben, because you agree. But the sort of interesting thing in terms of the political dynamics of it, or even the palace politics, if you prefer, is that Judith Collins said, Christopher Luxon said, "It's fine. No one. I'm not for a second going to admonish Shane Jones, this leading minister of the New Zealand First Party." Judith Collins says, "I will," and so she does. And then they go through the processes of that, and Shane Jones comes out looking a bit like he did when he was standing beside Christopher Bishop, announcing that he wouldn't be part of the triumvirate. Looking in his sort of sad puppy face, he does. But obviously being part of it. "Oh yes, I was told I must not." And then Winston Peters comes out and says, "I'm with Judith Collins on this." Quite right. Shane overstepped the mark there. We must respect comity. Blah 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 blah. But, Bells, where does that leave Christopher Luxon? I mean, Christopher Luxon seems never to discipline anyone. Is that just the way it goes and that's fine, or does he end up looking weak?
I think Luxon looks impotent in this situation, and particularly so because he was so critical of the last government in terms of what he considered to be ill discipline among the ministers. And fair enough, there was a lot of ill discipline among the ministers, and he spoke out very strongly, and he promised that under his leadership we would see a well-disciplined team that stuck to the tikanga of their ministerial positions, and that's what we haven't seen. But we have seen him quickly turn on people like Melissa Lee for underperformance in a role where she actually didn't have very much power and was being blocked by her own colleagues. So I think, it's not a good look for him, but more importantly, it's a terrible look for Shane Jones.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so the Cheryl Gwynne communist, and Cheryl Gwynne, I just want to say, Justice Cheryl Gwynne superb. I mean, I've disagreed with a number of the judgments that she's made since going to the bench, but she was a Deputy Solicitor General. She was excellent in that role when Chris Finlayson was the attorney. And she was also the first General Inspector for the Security Intelligence Services under the reforms in 2014. And I think everybody agrees that she did a fantastic job there as well. Also a member of some socialist league when she was, at university. But that comment was made by Jones in a now very well publicised and extremely detailed account in a file note of a meeting between Goldsmith Jones and representatives of the seafood industry, where they discussed the Marine and Coastal Area Takatai Moana Act and the government's proposed amendments. I mean, look, whatever you think of any of it, I think the ministers probably have a bit of a right to be kind of spitting tax that the officials sort of took that level of notes and entered it into the official record, which then I guess must have come to light through the Waitangi Tribunal inquiry.
He didn't say it on News Talk ZB in the way that, say, Stuart Nash sort of did.
You would normally not expect that. Well, you probably wouldn't expect that officials would take many notes at all, apart from things they had to action, let alone sort of stray insults leveled during conversation. Now when those comments came to light, Judith Collins, who as the Attorney General is the defender of the judiciary against political interference, she declined to admonish Jones about that, sort of in the say. She didn't join in, as Luxon did, but she didn't feel any action was necessary because of the nature of the comments. But of course, when he sort of stood up and accused the judges of totalitarianism, which I think that's the wrong accusation to make at the judiciary. It's very activist. It's sort of a bit off the reservation in terms of some of its judgments, but I wouldn't say totalitarian is the accusation. And of course, as a minister, you can't really say that about judges. So Collins was absolutely right to come in and admonish Jones there. And Winston Peters, I'm not surprised by that. He was a lawyer early in his career, and he takes this sort of thing actually very seriously.
Yeah, it's so interesting how people just continue to repeat that, we have activism within our judiciary, and it's almost like if you say it a million times, it becomes true in a way to discredit decisions that perhaps don't fall your way. The truth is that we have a range of different judges who come from a range of different backgrounds and ideologies and all of those things, and they're required to put those things to one side. But of course, as humans, we all are informed by our own upbringing and all of those things. But I think it's really concerning the way we are eroding our trust in our judiciary because politicians and others continue to push this line that somehow they've gone rogue and they're making decisions that are not within their power when actually it's just not true.
And the truth is that finally Parliament is sovereign and they sometimes change laws if they need to. And in a unicameral system, quite useful to have a judiciary that examines the application of laws properly. You're going to disagree again, Ben.
Look, I think there's plenty to disagree with in terms of sort of some of the recent jurisprudence of the Supreme Court. Not everything, of course, but irrespective of that, it is right that politicians shouldn't be denigrating the court publicly. If they disagree with the decisions, if they feel they need to legislate over them, they can do that, but they should do it in a reasoned and a respectful way.
Yeah, that's right. It's one thing to criticise decisions, to disagree with decisions, but when you're trying to actually discredit your judiciary, and we're not like the US, where they genuinely have a highly politicised judicial system. Ours is much fairer, I like to think. So, yeah, I agree, Ben. Like, one thing to criticise decisions, another thing to discredit the judiciary.
You talked earlier about the sort of unfortunate confluence of, Chris Bishop talking about, how ridiculous it was to ascribe different forms of transport to different parties right before, Simeon Brown sort of said, we're cutting cycleways and National believes in roads. And there was another thing last week. I think it was the same day that some of these further comments to the seafood industry from that extremely detailed file note were being asked about, which was where he had talked about how under his proposed changes, or the changes that the government was working on to the Marine and Coastal Area Act, the amount of coastline which would go into customary title would be closer to sort of 5%, than 100% or whatever. And I think he admitted that it was bad form to sort of try and put a number on it. You should be looking at the principles and the application of the law on customary title, not just sort of trying to get a threshold to achieve a certain number target. But the other thing was that, one of the things he said was, well, we just think, there's a very high threshold for displacing the idea that all New Zealanders have an equal say in what happens on the coast. And then I think it was later that day, Parliament passed a law unilaterally extending the consents of all marine farms by 20 years. So, which basically privatizes an area of the coastline for aquaculture without any public discussion for 2 more decades.
Which is the industry that sparked the whole foreshore and seabed debate in the very first place. That's right, and it shows the sort of I think it shows the sort of lie here that customary marine title in any way is about opposition to privatizing the foreshore, because the foreshore effectively can be privatized by councils and by government with, ports, marinas, aquaculture, mining in particular. Mining stops anyone else using that area, for offshore wind or for, boating. So, it really is a little disingenuous, I think, of the government to keep using that line, and it certainly creates ample opportunity for absurdities and contradictions like we saw last week. Well said.
Well, on that note of audiocast comedy, we should say goodbye. Thanks to everyone who participated in this podcast, and also you for listening. Goodbye, kia ora.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.